my name is David, and I'd like to present to you these videos called Talking About News, where we look at the words and the phrases that color our news today. So today is July 21st, and we will be looking at a major news story this week, which was about the relations between the United States and Cuba. There have been many articles starting Monday morning about this new diplomacy between the countries. There are three parts to this story so far. One is that there have been secret negotiations between the countries, which we sort of already knew, but now we see the result of these negotiations. Two, that Cuban flags have gone up in Washington, D.C., which is historic and interesting. And three, that the Secretary of State, John Kerry, will be visiting Cuba in August. A quick side note about this story that I found interesting is from metronews.ca, where it says that the two sides, Cuba and the United States, mostly did their negotiations in Canada. And the result of the negotiations is that there is less hostility now, there is less distrust, and there is less enmity. And enmity is a word that is not often used. You don't often hear it, but you'll see it in stories about Cuba and the United States. It means, enmity means a very strong feeling of dislike for someone, that you have even hatred for someone. So much so that it shows in your actions and in your expressions. And so enmity, hostility, distrust are all words that paint a picture of an unhealthy relationship. So can we say now that there is a healthy relationship between the countries? That there is friendship and trust and civility? Well, we can't. There is more friendship now, but as we see in this headline from Havana Times, there are still unresolved disputes between the countries. And by the way, I will put the link to this article from the Havana Times in the description box for this video, because I found it is easy to read, it's quick, and it is informative about what Cuba and the United States will be discussing in negotiations in the future. And from yahoo.com, we see that the Cuban flag flies as the United States and Havana renew ties despite discord. So we have discord that remains. Negotiations must continue, and differences remain between the countries and their leaders and what they believe and think. There is a travel ban between countries, as well as a trade embargo. A trade embargo blocks goods and services from being traded with Cuba and the United States, but also makes it difficult for them to trade with North America as a whole. And a travel ban means that citizens of the United States cannot go to Cuba and Cubans cannot go to the United States. And that is why negotiations took place in Canada. So despite these disputes that are ongoing, that remain, the news about this diplomacy between Cuba and the United States is considered good news. The style of writing about this topic is optimistic. So we see words that reflect a new hope, a bit more cheeriness. We see the word thaw, which is a word that is often used when relations between Cold War enemies become friendlier. After all, the two countries are only 145 kilometers away. That's 90 miles between Cuba and the shore of Florida, one of the southern United States. The second piece of news is about the Cuban embassy on American soil, where the Cubans raised their flag on Monday, and the building became officially an embassy of the Cubans. And meanwhile, also in Washington, D.C., at the U.S. State Department, the Cuban flag was put up in the lobby of that building. So two important Cuban flags went up in Washington, and we see these flags flying now. Business Insider called this an historic moment. And each country now has an embassy representing itself inside the other's territory. So what about the American flag in Cuba? Well, CNN writes that Kerry will make an historic trip to Cuba on August 14th. That's the Secretary of State of the United States. He is going to Cuba to raise the American flag. And so by the middle of August, flags should be flying in both countries. So this week we see quite a bit of news about flags that are flying, that have been raised, and that have been put up as a sign of a new diplomacy between Cuba and the United States. When Secretary of State John Kerry visits Cuba in August to raise the flag, it will be considered historic because no Secretary of State has gone to Cuba since 1945. In other news about Cuba, we have learned that Germany is re-establishing its ties with Cuba. It is re-establishing its diplomatic ties with the country. From this headline on Politico.eu, we learned that the German Foreign Minister, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, has already gone to Cuba, and that diplomacy between Cuba and the German Democratic Republic used to be strong, and that in 1945 connections or ties between the countries were close. So we have the words close and strong. We can also say healthy to describe the amount of friendship that is in a diplomatic connection, or the state of ties between countries and the state of the relationship between them. This brings us to the end of the first Talking About News video. I hope you find it useful. If you don't, that's fine. If I'm talking too fast, leave me a message saying that, and I will slow down for sure. And please subscribe if you do find it useful, because I will have new videos for you soon. So thanks for tuning in, and yeah, I'll see you soon.